Magic starts off with a little bit, and now Kareem comes in to grab onto him around the shoulders as Magic was having a few words with Shays, and Kareem, who was not even a participant in it, came into the little confrontation and was called for the technical.
So it looks like things kick off with Magic getting into it a bit, and then Kareem steps in to get a hold of him around the shoulder, apparently after Magic exchanged some words with Shays, from Danny Shays, who almost had his eyes scratched out by Kareem, to Kent Benson, who literally squared up with, and all the way to Michael Jordan, who he described as simply unfortunate. We're diving into 20 players that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar really seemed to despise. And we're starting with one of the most compelling and ultimately heartbreaking relationships in the history of basketball, Wilt Chamberlain. Back in the late 1960s, before he was Kareem, he was Lou Alcindor, an incredible young phenom at UCLA, and believe it or not, Wilt Chamberlain took him in as a protege. Wilt would show the young player around Harlem, have him over to his house, give him tips on how to deal with the loneliness that comes with fame, and even introduced him at major events like the 1969 Maurice Stokes Memorial Game. But here's where it all started to go south. During that exact same game in 1969, it was their first time facing each other, and Wilt threw down a dunk on Abdul-Jabbar with this smug look on his face. Abdul-Jabbar immediately answered with a dunk of his own, which basically signaled the end of their friendship and the start of a bitter rivalry that would shape their interactions for decades. The entire feud went public after they both retired when Kareem wrote a scathing open letter titled An Open Letter to Wilt Chamberlain, where he called Wilt a complaining crybaby and a quitter for always pointing fingers at his teammates and backing down from challenges, specifically bringing up Wilt's meltdown in the 1969 finals against Bill Russell. Of course, Wilt fired right back in his 1991 autobiography, A View from Above, claiming Abdul-Jabbar just saw him as an obstacle to becoming the greatest center ever and called him a total phony. Wilt even pointed out that Kareem's shooting numbers always took a nosedive whenever they played against each other. Now let's shift to a different kind of tension, one that came from Kareem's frustration with how one of the sport's biggest icons has used his voice on social issues. And that's LeBron James. In early December of 2021, Kareem went on record saying he did not approve of LeBron's Sam Cassell dance after hitting a three against the Pacers, labeling it dumb, immature, and rude, and flatly stating, "Goats don't dance." Just a few weeks later that same month, Kareem called out LeBron's Instagram post, a Spider-Man meme that made it seem like COVID-19, the flu, and a cold were all the same thing. Kareem said it was a serious stain on his incredible legacy, and suggested LeBron was pushing out harmful misinformation even though he has access to the best doctors in the world. The critiques didn't stop there. In March 2020, at a Lakers ceremony where Carmelo Anthony was being honored with the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Social Justice Champion Trophy, Kareem once again said that some of LeBron's behavior was just beneath him and that it's difficult to know where he really stands because he plays both sides of an issue. LeBron kind of brushed off the criticism about the meme, basically saying that everyone was just trying to navigate the pandemic, but it was obvious the relationship was strained. In fact, in October 2022, when asked about Kareem's opinions, LeBron just said they don't have a relationship. But despite all the public callouts and the clear distance between them, Kareem showed absolutely zero bitterness when LeBron passed him on the all-time scoring list in 2020. During a 2015 interview on NPR with Michelle Martin, Kareem brought up Jordan's choice not to endorse Harvey Gantt in his Senate race against a candidate known for racially problematic views. He pointed to MJ's notorious line, "Republicans buy sneakers too," as proof that Jordan put his business interests ahead of his moral compass. Kareem's criticism was direct and powerful. He said you can't be scared of losing some shoe sales when you should be worried about basic civil and human rights. He chose commerce over conscience, and Kareem called it unfortunate for him, something he would have to deal with, and this wasn't just a one-off comment. In 2018, Kareem made the case that Jordan isn't the greatest of all time, arguing that just being dominant isn't everything. He implied that Jordan didn't have the wider impact on society, culture, and community advancement that truly great athletes should strive for. Their beef was always more about ideology than any personal drama, and there were never reports of bad blood when they were face to face. But Kareem's public comments left no doubt about his disappointment in MJ's decisions. He defended his stance in multiple interviews, stressing that when it's time to take a stand, athletes have an obligation to do so, no matter what it might cost them financially. That was a principle Kareem himself lived by his whole career, even when it lost him endorsements, fans, and goodwill when he was at the peak of his powers. Now let's get into one of the most notorious moments in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's entire career. The incident with Kent Benson. This all went down during Benson's very first NBA game in 1977. he was playing for the Milwaukee Bucks against Kareem's Lakers. Benson, who was the #1 draft pick out of Indiana, actually outjumped Kareem at the opening tip and scored quickly, trying to make a statement with a lot of confidence and aggression. As they were fighting for position in the opening minutes, Kareem threw an elbow into Benson's chest, and Benson fired back with an elbow to Kareem's stomach. Kareem bent over, glanced to see if the refs were looking, and then just 2 minutes into the game, he unloaded a vicious punch right to Benson's temple. It knocked the rookie to the ground and sent him straight to the hospital with a concussion, a badly swollen eye and cuts that needed stitches. The punch also shattered Kareem's own hand, which sidelined him for 21 games. The league hit Kareem with a $5,000 fine, and Commissioner Larry O'Brien condemned it as premeditated violence, saying there was zero room for that kind of fighting. Years later, both guys looked back on it. Benson decided not to sue and said it actually gave him a chance to learn about forgiveness. Kareem, for his part, showed true regret, saying, "I'm so sorry I did that." And let's check out another case of on-court violence, this time involving Happy Hairston. It was during a nationally televised game in 1972 that actually snapped the Lakers' legendary 3-3 game win streak. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was putting on a clinic against his old team with 39 points and 20 boards, but the game is mostly remembered for one ugly moment. Down under the hoop, Happy Hairston went down awkwardly underneath Kareem in what looked like a deliberate attempt to hurt him. Kareem, convinced that Hairston was trying to take him out, landed a right uppercut to Hairston's head while he was still down on all fours. It was a shocking moment of violence that was broadcast to millions of people watching at home. In the aftermath, Kareem seemed to question what he'd done, calling it a moment of spur-of-the-moment fury, and admitting, "I'd much rather have been able not to do it." He knew he had gone too far, even for an era where fights were way more common and often ignored by the refs, who just accepted the game's physicality. His own teammate, Lucius Allen, commented on Kareem's short fuse when he felt threatened, joking that it was because he was an Aries. Meanwhile, his coach Larry Costello pointed out that teams had been getting way more physical with Kareem all season long, as opponents were desperately trying to find any possible weakness in his nearly perfect offensive game, which was built around that legendary, unstoppable skyhook. This next brawl actually pushed the NBA to start calling for some serious rule changes in their games, and it involved Tom Burleson. In a game in Seattle on January 26, 1977, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's patience with defenders holding him finally snapped. He punched the 7'2" Tom Burleson from behind after Burleson had hooked his arm while Kareem was making a move near the free throw line. The punch hit his temple and sent Burleson collapsing to the court. Later on, both players admitted that Burleson had been grabbing and holding Kareem defensively for most of the game, which was pretty standard for the physical style of play back then. Referees let a lot of contact go, so defenders were constantly grabbing, holding, and shoving offensive players without any penalties. That punch was part of a growing concern around the league about the rising level of violence, which led to an NBA memo in March of '77 that demanded a crackdown on fighting. This specific matchup between the two tallest players in the league was used as a prime example of how the physicality was getting out of hand and was damaging the sport's reputation at a time when the NBA was already having trouble competing with college basketball for viewers and credibility. While there are no specific records of fines or suspensions for that particular punch, it was very similar to Kareem's earlier fight with Kent Benson. It helped establish a pattern that showed even the most cerebral and self-controlled player in the league had a breaking point when he was subjected to constant physical abuse from guys who just couldn't hang with him skill-wise. Now we move to an incident that very nearly cost an NBA player his life, involving Kevin Cunnert. Kevin Connert's name is now infamous and tied to one of the ugliest moments in NBA history, the punch. But Connert's role in it was almost by accident. It was a chaotic scene that went from typical physicality to a life-and-death situation in just a few seconds on December 9, 1977. Here's how it went down. The 7-foot Rockets center grabbed a rebound off a missed hook shot from Kareem and started a fast break. That's when Lakers forward Kermit Washington grabbed his shorts to stop him. Cunnert threw an elbow. Punches started flying, and both teams rushed to the scene. Kareem jumped in and grabbed Cunnert in a huge bear hug, trying to pull him away and calm things down. Rockets forward Rudy Tomjanovich then ran in to try and be a peacemaker, but Washington spun around and delivered a horrifying punch straight to Tomjanovich's face. Kareem later said it sounded like a sickening crack, like a melon landing on concrete. Tomjanovich went down, with blood gushing from his face. His skull was fractured, spinal fluid was leaking, and his face was basically shattered. From the impact of the blow, Tomljanovic suffered absolutely devastating injuries, including that fractured skull and leaking spinal fluid. He missed the rest of the season as doctors fought to save his life and literally piece his face back together. And up next, the player who managed to get Kareem his very first technical foul and nearly lost an eye for it, Danny Shays. In Game 2 of the 1985 Western Conference Finals on May 14th, the raw intensity of playoff basketball just boiled over. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the Nuggets center Danny Shays started clashing as the game got rougher and rougher. With Denver ahead late in the fourth quarter, Shays gave Kareem a hard push to keep him from getting post position, which led to more shoving and finally, Kareem's first ever tech. Just a few moments after that, Shays supposedly elbowed Magic Johnson during a rebound, and Kareem climbed onto Shays' back and started scratching near his eyes. Shays, who ended up with a reddened eye and some scratches, said the whole thing was out of character for Kareem, stating he has earned a reputation as a very class guy. And now, moving on from that to a true clash of titans that took the entire NBA to another level. Larry Bird, they faced off 37 times between 1979 and the 1987-88 season, and Kareem's squads came out on top 21-16 overall, which included an 11-8 edge in the playoffs. A look at their head-to-head numbers really tells the tale of two absolute legends at the height of their abilities. Kareem put up an average of 24.5 points, 8 rebounds, and 3.4 assists, while Bird was right there with 23.7 points, 11.3 rebounds, and 5.4 assists. The pure intensity of their rivalry was on full display in 3 different NBA finals. The Celtics got the best of them in 1984 in a brutal 7-game series, but the Lakers got their revenge in 1985, winning 4-2, and then did it again in 1987, winning 4-2 in series that were just packed with physical play, psychological games, and the highest level of basketball you could imagine, with Hall of Famers on both sides just driving each other to be even greater. Some of the standout games include Bird dropping 36 points and grabbing 21 rebounds in a 1981 matchup, which just proved he could take over against anyone. Then there was Kareem's 36-point performance in Game 4 of the 1985 Finals, which helped clinch a championship that many people say was his most impressive moment at 38 years old. He won Finals MVP and finally got over the crushing loss from the year before. This entire rivalry was a massive boost for the NBA's popularity, at a time when the league desperately needed superstars who could pull in casual viewers with genuine bad blood between the iconic Celtics and Lakers franchises. This next relationship started as a fierce on-court competition and transformed into something completely different. We're talking about Bill Walton. Both of them were UCLA products who learned the game under the legendary coach John Wooden. Their rivalry really hit its peak in the 1977 Western Conference Finals, when Walton's Trailblazers swept Kareem's Lakers. And then again in the 1987 Finals, the script was flipped and the Lakers won 4-2. By then, Walton was in a much smaller role because of constant injuries and had to watch as Kareem added yet another ring to his legacy. Walton truly looked up to Kareem and always aimed to be better than him, even with their size difference. Meanwhile, Kareem had a deep respect for Walton's grit and his incredible all-around skills, which included elite passing, rebounding, and defense. That made Walton one of the very few centers who could ever argue they were better than Kareem during his short-lived prime before injuries took away his chance at long-term greatness. After they hung it up, they connected over their shared beliefs, both having fathers who loved music, and the massive impact Coach Wooden had on their lives. They discovered a friendship that just wasn't possible while they were playing, when the competitive fire made it tough to form a real bond despite all the mutual respect and similar backgrounds. In a touching tribute in 2024 after Walton passed away, Kareem called him my rival, my brother, and my close friend. He shared amazing stories like how Walton gave him hand-painted dishes as a gift and pushed him to stay positive when Wooden's health was failing in 2006. These were moments that show just how deep their connection was between two men who became brothers after the battle was over. Now let's move on to the stoic Celtics center they called the Chief. Robert Parrish. He was one of the key big men in the epic Celtics-Lakers rivalry of the 1980s, but Parrish always seemed to have a deep respect for Kareem, acknowledging his greatness even while they were fighting for titles and their place in history. Parrish's first major battle with Kareem happened when he was a rookie in the 1976-77 playoffs. Kareem absolutely went off, averaging a staggering 37.1 points, 18.7 rebounds and 3.6 blocks per game, playing 42 minutes a night through that series. Parrish called it a very humbling experience and his official welcome to the NBA moment. Across 33 career games against Kareem, Parrish averaged a solid 17.1 points, 10 rebounds and 1.8 assists, which showed he eventually figured out how to hang at that level. But he never could quite reach Kareem's level of consistent brilliance in their matchups, which stretched over a decade of intense battles. Later in life, Parrish called Kareem the single best player he ever went up against, saying without a doubt, "Kareem is the best player I ever played against, period. The best thing I could ever say about Kareem is that no one ever devised a defense that could stop him. That's the baddest man to ever play the game." He admitted that Kareem's skyhook and his entire game made for some very long nights, but they were also educational for a young center learning the ropes against the absolute best in the business. Up next, we've got the unstoppable rebounding force known as the chairman of the boards, Moses Malone. He presented a completely different kind of problem for Kareem, based on pure physical power. In 16 documented matchups from the 82-83 season to 80-89, Malone out-rebounded Kareem in every single game, 16-0. Their rivalry hit a boiling point in the 1983 NBA Finals when Malone's Philadelphia 76ers swept Kareem's Lakers. That was the year Malone famously predicted 4 wins in each playoff series, and he almost pulled it off. In that finals series, Malone racked up 72 rebounds compared to Kareem's 30, a massive 18-8 per game difference, as he led the sweep that robbed the Lakers of what should have been another title during their dynasty run, even with Kareem averaging a solid 25 points. And there's more on the rebounding front. Just look at Kareem trying to box Moses out. That is a war. And for a 38-year-old guy, he's going to get exhausted trying to keep that up. In fact, Malone led Kareem in rebounding every single season they played at the same time, with an estimated career advantage of 35 or even more in the games they both played. But Kareem did have the edge in shooting efficiency, hitting 52.3% compared to Malone's 47.2%, using that skyhook and his incredible offensive arsenal to outscore Moses in many of their games. Still, Malone's relentless energy made him the undisputed king of second chances. Here's a player that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar himself has identified as his most difficult opponent, Nate Thurmond. This defensive powerhouse for the Golden State Warriors got a special shout out from Kareem as his toughest matchup ever. Thurmond made him work for every single point with smart, quick defense that could even disrupt the unstoppable skyhook. Standing at 6'11" and 25 pounds, Thurmond's career stats were 15 points and 15 rebounds a game, and he ranks 5th all-time in total rebounds. In 37 regular season games against Thurmond, Kareem averaged 26.3 points and 14.1 rebounds, but shot just 47.3%, which is almost 8% lower than his career average. They went at it in 3 straight Western Conference playoffs, from 71 to 73. Thurmond's defense was particularly locked down in Game 6 of the 73 series, making life a living hell for the young center who was still figuring out how to deal with the NBA's smartest and most physical defenders. Kareem's praise for Thurmond was something special. He called him a great defensive center, tall, agile, who really understood how to play D's, saying, "He made me earn my points," and Thurmond gave that respect right back, saying, "I think when you put all the centers together, I think he's the best of all." He recognized Kareem's overall dominance, even while he was proud of his own ability to make their games competitive through his defensive skill rather than offensive fireworks. Next up is a player who, on a personal level, gave Kareem more trouble than Kareem gave him, all thanks to his physical approach and mental fortitude. Bob Lanier. He was Kareem's second toughest opponent because of his aggressive bullying style in the paint. He challenged Kareem's finesse game and threw him off with a level of physicality and strength that couldn't just be sidestepped with good footwork. Lanier put up 20.1 points, 10.1 rebounds, and 3.1 assists for his career. Impressive numbers that showcased his all-around talent as one of the best big men of his time who could score, rebound, and pass, even though his teams never reached championship glory. In 52 games against Lanier, Kareem averaged 26.7 points and 12.7 rebounds, but shot 53.9%, which was 2% below his career average. Kareem even resorted to some psychological tactics in their games. He famously took advantage of Lania's habit of smoking a cigarette at halftime by running him ragged in the second half. A trick he learned from reading Sherlock Holmes novels about finding and exploiting an opponent's weaknesses. But despite all that competitive fire, Lania eventually had to admit that Kareem was just better, saying, "I have to give my nod to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the toughest to guard. I had to give up 5 or 6 inches to him, and he was so incredibly talented. After they retired, they made amends and grew to respect each other as they both matured and could appreciate the other's greatness without the intense rivalry that had made their playing days so personal." This next player had the massive task of trying to prove he belonged against aging legends like Kareem. Patrick Ewing, he came into the NBA in 1985 as the league's next great hope when Kareem was 38 years old and still playing at an elite level. In 8 career matchups against Kareem, Kareem averaged 20.6 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 2.8 assists. With a 6-2 record, Ewing put up 18.8 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 2.80 blocks. One game in 1986 became iconic when Kareem dropped 40 points, hitting 6 straight skyhooks right over Ewing. That sequence of skyhooks was especially soul-crushing for Ewing, who could do nothing but stand there and watch as Kareem hit the exact same move again and again. Ewing later praised the era he came up in, saying, "Kareem was still playing, Moses was still playing, and Robert Parrish used to kick his butt every time they played Boston." He mentioned David Robinson, Shaq, and all those guys, saying every time you faced them, you had to bring your absolute best. He said, "I played in a great era where the big man was dominant." Now let's move on to a player who was famous for his fiery personality and his readiness to fight guys much bigger than him, Calvin Murphy. He was a Hall of Fame guard for the Houston Rockets from 1970 to 83 and built a reputation as one of the toughest guys in the NBA. Despite his small stature, his fights usually started because he was protecting teammates or firing back against physical play, and that included throwing at least one punch at Kareem during some intense Rockets-Lakers games in the mid-70s, which was common in that era's rough-and-tumble style. Murphy's absolute fearlessness was captured in a 1977 Sports Illustrated feature, which mentioned that he had thrown punches at Dave Cowens, Bob Lanier, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Murphy was also right in the middle of the infamous 1977 The Punch Brawl between the Lakers and Rockets. That mess started with Kareem missing a hook shot and getting tangled up with Kevin Cunnett. Murphy then rushed into the pile and made things even more chaotic, right before Kareem Washington landed that devastating punch on Rudy Tomjanovich that almost took his life. In 32 head-to-head games against Murphy's teams, Kareem averaged 25.8 points, 12.3 rebounds, and 4.1 assists, while Murphy posted 17.4 points and 4.6 assists. Kareem's teams won 20-12 in those matchups, where Murphy's scrappy play just wasn't enough to overcome the Lakers' superior talent and Kareem's absolute dominance inside. Up next is a guy who used to be Kareem's teammate before they ended up on opposite sides as rivals. Bob Dandridge. He was a key teammate of Kareem's during the Milwaukee Bucks' incredible 1970-71 championship run. When they won 66 games and the title, Kareem put up MVP-level numbers, while Dandridge was the perfect sidekick as a secondary scorer and defender. That championship season, Dandridge averaged 18.4 points, 8 rebounds, and 3.5 assists, fitting in perfectly with Kareem and Oscar Robertson to form a big three that was simply unbeatable. When they were healthy and in sync during their dominant playoff run, he took his game to another level in the postseason, helping them sweep the Lakers in the finals with performances that proved he belonged on the biggest stage with the legends. After he left Milwaukee in 1976 for the Washington Bullets, Dandridge had to face Kareem as an opponent. This likely created some tension through his physical defense in Bucks Bullets games, where former teammates were now competing with the fire of rivals who knew each other's every move and weakness from years of practicing together. Dandridge's toughness was described as a natural fit for championship-level teams, and that probably led to some intense battles when he faced his old partner. He was part of the era's long list of casualty lists from under basket hazards, which basically means injuries from hard collisions were just part of the job. When centers ruled the paint, and the forwards who dared to challenge them paid a physical price for their bravery and drive. The next player was a guard who had to deal with the dangers of driving into the lane against giants like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Ernie de Gregorio. He was a 6-foot guard and the 1974 NBA Rookie of the Year with the Buffalo Braves. His career is a perfect example of the physical toll that 1970s basketball took on players, as his career was cut short by injuries that were a direct result of the era's brutal style of play. He averaged 10.3 points and 5.7 assists over his career, but was constantly sidelined by injuries, including a right knee surgery that kept him out for most of the 1975-76 season. De Gregorio's recovery was slow, which added to the Braves' shortage of healthy bodies. In February 1976, injuries had wrecked rosters all over the league, and teams were struggling to put competitive squads on the floor every night in the grueling 82-game season. He had a short stint with the Lakers in 1977-78, playing alongside Kareem, who would later mention him in interviews. Years later, De Gregorio would talk about his NBA days with Hall of Famers like Kareem on podcasts, reflecting on what a privilege it was to compete against those legends, even though injuries kept him from having a long, successful career. Moving forward to a player who had an intense rivalry with Kareem that reached its peak in the 1974 NBA Finals. Dave Cowens. He averaged 20.5 points and 13.5 rebounds in those finals, and he actually outplayed Kareem in the critical Game 7 with 28 points and 14 rebounds to Kareem's 26 and 10. That performance secured the championship for Boston and is still considered one of the greatest individual efforts in finals history. Their matchups were incredibly physical. Cowens' aggressive style meant he guarded Kareem up close and challenged every single shot. This led to constant collisions and contact that really tested Kareem's patience and made him work way harder than usual to get his points. In that same 1974 finals, Kareem did hit a game winner in Game 6, right after Cowens had stolen the ball. One of those clutch plays that showed even when his team was down, Kareem was always a threat. Cowens winning the 1973 MVP over Kareem is still a topic of debate, as both players led 60-win teams, but Kareem had better individual stats in almost every single category. Despite their heated battles, they developed a mutual respect. Cowens called Kareem one of the greatest ever, and acknowledged that their rivalry brought out the absolute best in both of them during a time when the Celtics-Lakers-Bucks rivalries were the gold standard of professional basketball. And finally, here's a player who was known for his tough, aggressive style and for doing all the dirty work. Tom Boehrinkle, averaging 7.2 points and 9.0 rebounds for his career. Boehrinkle got his toughness by going up against elite big men early in his career. He learned how to survive in the paint against guys like Kareem, Chamberlain, and other giants who were far more talented, but those guys respected Boehrinkle's absolute refusal to back down, no matter how big the talent gap or the statistical disadvantage he was facing every single night. The Bulls-Lakers and Bulls-Bucks games were always physical battles, with Boehrinkle's style leading to some rough encounters with Kareem. Boehrinkle even mentored Artis Gilmore when the star center came to the Bulls, teaching him the physical brand of basketball he needed to survive in the NBA's trenches. Off the court, though, he was known as a gentle giant, a stark contrast to his on-court persona. This showed the kind of split personality that many players had to develop, their competitive side that would do anything to win, and their true selves, who were often kind and thoughtful people, just trying to make sense of a career that was built on controlled violence. In the brutally physical 1970s, Boehrinkle was the classic casualty-prone player who took a beating from under the basket, collisions that were just accepted as part of the game. He played through injuries that would sideline a modern player for weeks, because sitting out meant losing your spot to younger, healthier guys who were always chomping at the bit to take a roster spot from any veteran who showed the slightest sign of weakness or decline. The entire story of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's conflicts, rivalries, and feuds throughout his 20-year career truly reveals the complete picture of what it meant to be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar during basketball's most physically demanding and socially charged era. If you liked this video, go ahead and click on the ones you see on your screen to watch some more.